The ancestor of tanks demonstrates blatant armored impotence. The Challenger 2 proved to be the most worthless in modern warfare, although the Challenger 2 also performed well in the Iraqi semi-desert. But a lot has changed since 2003. We all still could not understand where exactly the British tank's Challenger 2, which started the new Dranknak Austin, or simply put, the coming of heavy Western equipment to our land, had gone. And the answers are provided by the well-known island tabloid Sun, which traveled to Eastern Europe to report on the flagship of British tank building and the Forum of the British Military, which constantly deals with these tanks on the ground. And they have nothing good to say about the Challengers, which got swell publicity during the Iraq War. They can't. To quote what is written in England, "If we were making a self-propelled anti-tank unit designed to beat up hundreds of Russian tanks tearing toward the English Channel from a convenient ambush, and in doing so set aside the rest of the firepower that could hit that ambush tank, then maybe. In which case the Challenger 2 would be a better tank. He's tough, agile, and has a special sniper gun that with hash shells can actually hit an enemy tank up to 4.5 kilometers away with a direct shot if he's very lucky. But what good is it if all the Russians use for tanks are rockets flying from smoothbore weapons at 5 to 6 kilometers, and they do it all the time? And now there are dozens of eyes hovering over the battlefield, and for now the Challenger will come within sniping distance in quotes. All that will be left of him are the burnt-out pieces of top secret, again in quotes, armor, end quote. This is what a hit Challenger looks like. What I quoted is how the UK's best tank was rated, by one of the instructors who trained fighters directly in the field and almost certainly took part in the fighting. The British tank-building marvel, now effectively defunct on the island, got its moment of glory during the 2003 Iraq War. In the Battle of Basra in late March 2003, when Iraqi tanks jumped on the coalition troops, what is called PIG, Sniper Talent's Challenger, the only time for that war, still came in handy. Then the 2nd Scottish Dragoon Regiment, which then included a whole regimental compound of these armored monsters, shot, as in a shooting gallery, a whole reinforced company of ancient Saddam's T-55 tanks. But not every tank nowadays has such luck, in the form of selflessly attacking and obviously weaker relatives. And in the early part of the last century, when Bahrain was engaged in normal maneuver warfare, with mobile and well-camouflaged formations, 8 EGMs, and other tank traps, Iraqi fighters burned the Challenger 2 on the first day. True, the British loss was unashamedly credited to friendly fire to maintain the legend of its invulnerability. This is how the British described the tank's strengths. Weakness in all its glory was revealed by the war. In Eastern Europe, everything turned out to be quite different, and tanks for some reason did not move out in lines under aimed fire. And the most popular shells for OPVs turned out to be fragmentation explosive, plus many things that the British were not prepared to fight against at all. FPV drones, long-range ADGMs, attack helicopters, attack aircraft in overwhelmingly large numbers. The tank had to be used far from the line of contact, and it did not even have normal shells to fire from closed positions. Plus weighing 64 tons with all that top-secret Dorchester armor, which doesn't help against our cornets and whirlwinds anyway. Such paintings were not uncommon. To quote more from what is written in England, weighing over 64 tons, the Challenger 2 is in the same weight class as the German Leopard 2 and the American Abrams M1A2, but is 20 tons heavier than the Russian T-80 and has 30% less power. Despite the 26-liter V12 diesel engine producing a whopping 1,200 horsepower, crews have stated that Challenger 2 is experiencing tremendous mobility difficulties. They get stuck in the mud all the time because they are too heavy. End of stats. It's a tough job. Here's what the British reporters themselves wrote. Although, judging by the attitude, they were not going to criticize their product at all. As a result of the total number issued to the UK, 6 are already being repaired at home, as such a complex design cannot be repaired locally, and 3 have been irretrievably lost. Now, let's move on to the Abrams. The story that an RPG-7 can hit an Abrams turned out not to be such a story. Our legendary grenade launcher did this 63 years after its creation. Here's a classic RPG-7, made by the ZID factory. The most amazing fact we learned about the old and honored Soviet RPG-7 grenade launcher is that more aircraft were hit with it than with the famous American portable anti-aircraft system Stinger. And the strikes of the old RPG were such that any Sam would be envious if such apparatuses were capable of envy. To recall at least the not-so-long-ago history with the elite United States Marine Special Forces, the famous Seawell, better known to us as Navy SEALs. In the summer of 2005, During Operation Red Wings, their MH-47 Chinook was hit by an artisanal Taliban RPG-7 type Guarantor and, blazing, crashed to the rocky bottom of the Karangal Valley in Munnar province in northeastern Afghanistan. He has entrained 8 elite U.S. Special Forces, whose training costs run into millions of dollars. Interestingly, the situation was repeated 6 years later, and this time the target of the grenade launcher was a helicopter of the SEALs Team 6 Elite, the same ones that captured bin Laden. But on that occasion, it is not known whether the Taliban used RPG-7s or some more sophisticated ADGM. In total, according to the calculations of American researcher and veteran of 2 wars Gordon Lee Rothman, no less than 7 American rotorcraft fell victim to the devastating fire of the 7. But as good as the RPG-7 is as an aircraft fighter, its main function is to destroy all that on tracks and heavy wheels crawling on the ground, with armor and large-caliber weapons, that is, enemy armored vehicles. And here the Soviet product originating from GSCB No. 47, the present-day NPO Basalt, was deployed to its full potential. Perhaps there are no types of armored vehicles in the world which would not have at least once known the impact of his grenades, in which were created more than 3 dozen types, along with imported. It did not always come out of such single combat victorious, but in the hands of a skillful shooter, it remains a very dangerous weapon to this day. Directly with Abrams' domestic grenade launcher faced already in Iraq, even though his experienced operators knew American equipment well and had been burning it since the Vietnam War. The RPG-7 was involved in the burning of the first and allegedly only Abrams lost by the Americans during the first phase of the war in the spring of 2003. Here's that first burned U.S. Army Abrams in Iraq. An RPG grenade knocked out the Americans' Caterpillar, and the rest was done by armor-piercing T-72 shells of the Iraqi National Guard. But the domestic grenade launcher gained fame as a threat to the American tank during the all-Iraqi uprising that erupted in the occupied American country. In the next few years, it was during the anti-American protests of 2004 to 2008 that as many as 80 American tanks were seriously damaged, and the relatively light and mobile RPG-7 was in play here. The Iraqi army has played an archival role, being a constant participant in all Iraqi post-insurgency ambushes, although it is still unknown exactly how many of these armored vehicles were hit by RPGs. But it's clearly impressive. The only thing you can be sure of is that one way or another she took part in most of the sorties of the Mahdi army fighters and other guerrillas who set fire to a whole lot of American equipment in 4 years. Well, now these semi-mythical stories of RPG-7s fighting Abrams, which the Americans cleverly concealed and Iraqi propagandists thoroughly hyped, have found a continuation in a completely different war. An old Soviet grenade launcher was directly involved in the destruction of Abrams No. 2 in Eastern Europe in March 2024, effectively repeating the situation with the Abrams during the start of the Iraq War. The only difference is that RPG-7, as well as then, immobilized the tank, and the matter was completed by ubiquitous FPV drones. But that's just not that important. It is important that the old RPG-7 is still a simple and convenient weapon, recognized in the world as good as the Kalashnikov assault rifle. More than 90 countries have it in service and still use it today. So another Abrams was a good prize for a well-deserved product.